If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
We're back with former FBI Director Jim Comey. I want to read through some of the questions you wrote in Lawfare, sort of a line of questioning that both in substance and your approach might yield some of the best kind of evidence that the public could garner from the wall-to-wall coverage that everyone expects tomorrow. Can I tick through some of them and then tell me what kind of answers and what kind of evidence would be elicited by these questions?
Sure.
Okay. So you write, you suggest that members of Congress in either party, any party interested in facts, should ask questions like this to Mr. Mueller. Did you reach a judgment as to whether the president had committed obstruction of justice crimes? Did you find substantial evidence that the president had committed obstruction of justice crimes? What would those elicit?
A no to the first one and a yes to the second one. And I think those are the best kind of answers in this context, because I don't think the special counsel, if you ask him an open-ended question, is going to give you a question that is as easy as those are for people to digest.
And, I mean, we've all become students of Robert Mueller. You worked closely with him. I worked in the Bush White House when he served as FBI director. Yes or no questions are something that I think he's made 88 visits to Capitol Hill. He knows the answer. Those come out quickly, and they can certainly build an argument. Let's keep going. I hope they're watching. For example, did you find that the president directed the White House counsel to call the acting attorney general and tell him the special counsel must be removed? Did you find that the White House counsel decided he would rather resign than carry out that order? That's from the obstruction volume. I think it's page 85, where Don McGahn, as one of Mueller's most important witnesses, describes these incidents. What's the significance of getting Bob Mueller on the record on that incident?
Because that's a clear-cut effort to terminate a criminal investigation by the president. That the White House counsel's actions indicate that, at least to the White House counsel, he understood they were corrupt. One of the things the Attorney General has said in the wake of this report is that the president really just wanted the White House counsel to share his concerns with the Justice Department about whether there were any disabling conflicts on the part of the special prosecutor. Now, if that's really what he was asking the White House counsel to do, you wouldn't think the White House counsel would drive home, call his private lawyer, and then go pack up his office to quit over it. That's important because the White House counsel's reaction indicates the context, the tenor, and the tone of the president's direction to shut this thing down.
The tenor and the tone describe a line in the Mueller report that says that Don McGahn said to Reince Priebus, who was then the White House chief of staff, like 7 ago, the president asked me to do some crazy bleep, rhymes with hit. Okay, let me keep going. Did you find that the president wanted the White House counsel to write a false memo saying he had not been ordered to have the special counsel removed? And did you find that the White House counsel refused to do that because it wasn't true? What does that get at?
Well, that's important because among the stuff we've heard from the Attorney General is this notion that you can't bring an obstruction case if the obstructive conduct is at the core of the president's constitutional responsibilities to make sure that the laws are executed and to oversee the executive branch. This is an example of something that doesn't come within a mile of those core responsibilities, because what the special counsel found is the president was trying to order the documentation of a lie. He was tampering with a witness, and he was suborning false testimony, trying to get a written record created that was untrue. That is clearly outside the bounds of any core presidential responsibility and a substantial basis for an obstruction charge.
And I'm told that that was one of the incidents known to be under scrutiny that the White House was most concerned about as it awaited the conclusion of the obstruction investigation. Is that a place where the president is particularly vulnerable?
Sure, because I don't believe there's a straight-faced argument that this is him making a decision, as they've argued in my case, about who should be in what job in the executive branch. This is him saying to a senior officer in the White House, hey, I need you to lie about this thing to protect me. There's no colorable claim that that's protected activity.
Okay, and now just to show you that I'm a good student, I've been to your class. Let me do 3 on you that I think we'll hear from Republicans. Is Crossfire Hurricane the name that the FBI gave into the investigation into the Trump campaign and potential contacts with Russians?
Yes.
Did Pete Strzok decide to keep Crossfire Hurricane secret from the public until after Election Day and indefinitely as far as he was involved?
No, I did.
Did Pete Strzok recommend to you that investigation remain confidential?
Not that I remember. It was so obvious that it needed to, because it was just beginning and it was classified and we didn't know whether we had anything. I don't remember anybody raising the prospect that we ought to disclose that in some way. We needed to discuss what to tell the American people about what the Russians were doing, but the part about whether any Americans were connected to it, we never considered disclosing.
Did any man or woman who works at or is associated with the FBI ever suggest to you or propose making public that Donald Trump was under investigation by the FBI?
No, not that I remember. Certainly not before the election. There was Actually, no, I don't remember ever that happening.
So if you could just to sort of prepare everybody for what will be so detached from reality, what are the Republicans armed with tomorrow when they come in? Propaganda, politics? What are they going to be undermining Robert Mueller's investigation with? Armed with what?
I don't know. I think maybe some of the nonsense about whether Peter Strzok should have worked for him or Lisa Page, and this business about whether texts on FBI phones were adequately preserved or some nonsense. But beyond that, I think I'm afraid they'll do it. I wish they wouldn't, that they'll try and burn down Bob Mueller in some way, that he was conflicted because he was at the same golf club as Trump or something, or his long and close, loving relationship with me that the president keeps talking about.
And my last question for you, please describe your relationship with Robert Mueller. Is it, I think Donald Trump was at it again yesterday in the Oval Office saying you're best friends. Are you guys best friends?
No, I admire the man. I like the man. I have not spoken to him in 3 years. He doesn't know my children's names. I don't know his. He's a great American. He's not a personal friend of mine, but he is a great American. And if there's good tomorrow, the American people will learn two things. He found some troubling facts, and he represents what you would want your children to grow up to be.
Mr. Director, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We're lucky to get to call on you, and I'm grateful to you. I'm glad you're in St. Louis. I know Claire is too.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Chuck, let me come straight to you. I mean, some really important information there, and I hope some of the members who will be questioning Robert Mueller follow Director Comey's advice about how yes or no responses from Robert Mueller simply underscores the veracity and the power of what's in that report.
Right. Either short declarative questions, and he agrees or disagrees with the question, or you ask Mueller in his own words to read parts of the report. As you've said, Nicole, you can open up to any darn page.
I brought it. Right. I brought it. Mine's covered with stickies, but you could flip to any page in any volume, and it's devastating.
You could ask Bob Mueller to randomly read paragraphs from the report, and it's devastating. And again, this is the difference between a book and a movie. So if we learn anything tomorrow, it's because we're paying attention to the movie. Right. And there's some value in that. My hopes are not crazy high. I don't know that there's a lot of undecided people in this country, or people who are going to watch it with an open mind. Mm-hmm. People are predisposed to hear what they're going to hear and see what they're going to see. But if you take the time and you listen tomorrow, and the questions are good, you can learn something.
Claire.
Well, I think the dirty little secret is the problem with congressional hearings is that members of Congress are anxious to make news about themselves, not about the subject. They want to grab that moment. And it's particularly acute in the House, where there are so many members. And trying to get that spot in the sun is harder than it looks. What I'm most afraid of is that members will have what I used to call, when I was training young lawyers for the courtroom, a Perry Mason moment, where they think if they just do the question right, the witness will break down on the stand. And you know how many times this happens, right, guys? I mean, the defendant breaks down the stand and says, oh, yes, I did it. This is not that kind of hearing. And everyone needs to park their ego at the door, park their own political campaigns at the door, park their local coverage at the door, and allow the report to speak for itself. And Mueller will be a wonderful narrator if they'll give him the chance. I am so nervous that
I think we all are.
That they're going to try to, be a star in the hearing, and instead, it's going to give the other side the opportunity to make it look wildly political.
David.
I think there's four powerful moments that could be created tomorrow. One is, if Donald Trump wasn't president, would you have charged him? That's the one. That's the obvious one. The other is, Mr. Mueller, when Donald Trump says no obstruction, no collusion, is he correct? Do you agree with that? And Bob Mueller will likely say no. A third one I think would be powerful is a discussion over the circulation of polling data with Russian interest, because that's something easily understood by the American people. Why would the Trump campaign be sharing polling data? And just a conversation around that. But the fourth one is something, it's a little contrarian, which is to put the focus back on Congress. Bob Mueller said, look, I did all this and I didn't offer an opinion. As Director Comey said, one, I wanted to preserve the information, but two, he said, because charging a sitting president has to happen in a forum other than the criminal justice system. So, Mr. Mueller, according to OLC and your understanding of the Constitution, what forum is that? And if I'm a backbencher Judiciary Committee who thinks House leadership isn't giving this enough urgency, I want that moment when Mueller says to Congress, hey, this is on you now. Because at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of people that believe, and I know I'm going to upset some folks when I say this, it is not Bob Mueller's job to convince the American people whether or not Donald Trump should be impeached. It is not the American people's job to read the Mueller report. They have elected representatives in Washington whose job it is to determine what's in the report and determine if it rises to the level of accountability. If it does, then tell the American people you're going to do that. And if it doesn't, tell them you're not going to move on that. I keep going back to this, though. If Democrats do nothing when all this is said and done, because when the final gavel hits tomorrow, that's it with Mueller. If Democrats decide to do nothing, then they've accepted Bob Barr's recommendation that nothing in the report rises to the level of accountability. And history will recall that Bill Barr and House Democrats came to the same conclusion.
I don't want to skip over this. This is really, really important. This is the most important point ahead of these hearings. This is it.
This is it.
And if he gets reelected, and Nancy Pelosi was, hand-wringing on impeachment, I'm sure she has really good reasons. But if any of them are political, this will be what she'll be reaping what she sowed. They better be principled. They better not be political calculations. She better not think he did anything impeachable.
And you can be principled in saying we're not going to impeach. You don't have to be political, right? There could be a powerful moment where Nancy Pelosi says he's a terrible guy.
If she doesn't think he deserves to be impeached, if she doesn't see an underlying crime in SDNY, God bless her. I wish I read what she read. If she doesn't see in Mueller's obstruction report anything worse, and I'm not saying they have to conclude that impeachment is justified, but commencing an impeachment proceeding is what the Justice Department thought this report would elicit. They were expecting to have to turn over grand jury evidence, to have to turn over underlying evidence in the course of an impeachment proceeding being commenced. And I think that if Donald Trump is reelected, and in the second term, maybe a reporter ends up in jail. Maybe one of those investigators being investigated for the third time now ends up in jail. I think that every Democrat that blinked when this document came out will have some explaining to do.
Mueller expected Congress to open an impeachment proceeding. I think that is clear from what he said. And to your point, much of the legacy of Donald Trump will be determined in the next 10 days. Because Bob Mueller testifies tomorrow, and 10 days from now, the House goes on a 5-week vacation. And there will be zero urgency to this when they return in September. So I think the American people are begging for clarity from leadership. If it's impeachment, let's go. If it's not, explain yourself then.
Barrett.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think what's so important here is that you really do have two distinct audiences for tomorrow's proceedings, right? You have the American public, who, as we've all acknowledged, probably have not read the report in all of its granular detail. And I think for that audience,
I have to always carve out the viewers of this program. They have
except
read
for the viewers.
This report.
That's right. That's right.
They stop me on the street and they say, I have read the report. I hate it when people say we didn't read the report. They have read the report.
But even if you have read the report is dense. It is full of detail, some of it very nuanced. It's full of legalese. So I think for the American public, for that segment of the audience, exactly as Chuck was saying, I think you want to have sort of discrete leading questions that give a yes or no. And part of that is just to have some sort of a soundbite, for lack of a better word, to counteract the no collusion, no obstruction mantra. But the other audience, as David was saying, is the members of Congress. And for that audience, it shouldn't be leading questions that get to an answer that you already know you want to hear. It should be open-ended questions. What is there still left in their minds that they don't know that's holding them back?
Are they yelling at me to go? I got to come back to you on this. I mean, why can they? Are they not capable of asking questions they don't know the answer to? I didn't know the answer to the questions I asked Jim Comey. I mean, are they not capable of asking questions they don't know the answers to?
Nicole, what should happen tomorrow is just the opposite. Every question a Democrat answers, they should ask. They should know the answer to it. The definition of a good cross-examination is you only ask a question that you know what the answer is going to be based on evidence you have, based on depositions, based on witness statements. In this instance, this is the deposition. And those members of that committee should not ask one question that they do not know what his answer is going to be based on what's in that report, because he's not going to say anything else. He is not going to say anything else. But I've got to say one thing. I think one of the things, and I get what the point you're making about the principle of what's in this report and whether or not impeachment should begin. And I get the point you are making. But remember, these folks are responding to the public. And let's not lose sight of the fact that the public is not clamoring for impeachment. The public is not asking for impeachment proceedings. The public is reluctant for us to get into this.
But impeachment doesn't start from the public. I mean, there's no example in history.
But members of Congress respond to the public. I've watched it time and time again. It happens. So what tomorrow is an opportunity to try to get the public more engaged so that we can, in fact, find that moment in the sun, which would be justice based on the facts in this report. But don't lose sight of the job they have to do bringing the public along, because anybody who sits and says this is simple, because this is very difficult politically and on principle, it's difficult.
Let me just follow up with one question. I'm not saying that impeachment's the right thing. I'm saying if you think crimes were committed, that's what Mueller found. If you accept what the Southern District of New York has sponsored, which is that Donald Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator in an illegal hush money scheme, then whether the public is with you or not, if X, then Y. If he's committed crimes, then you should investigate them if you're Congress.
There's no question, except impeachment is a different animal than charging a crime. Impeachment involves it involves the public. It involves the American people and whether or not they're going to take an action to negate what they did. As much as I dislike what the American people did, as much as I'm frustrated with the Electoral College and the fact that he didn't win the popular vote, as frustrated I am as Russia's involvement, we've got to realize that when we move to negate the actions of the American people in electing a president, it's got to be done carefully. And I think tomorrow will tell the tale whether or not this is a moment that the public finally realizes this guy did terrible things and is making a mockery of respect of the rule of law in this country.
We're so over. I'm getting screamed at, but I got to give you one chance to button this up. It is interesting to me at this moment that people from law enforcement, especially Republicans from government law enforcement, are more open to a process that investigates and holds him accountable for crimes than politicians, especially Democratic politicians.
Yeah, and I think I oversimplify this because I come out of that law enforcement world, as does Barrett. I mean, we look at the evidence, whether you call it a deposition or a report. We look at the evidence and we see overwhelming indicia.
What's that mean?
Evidence.
It sounded like a plural Latin word. Okay, thank you, Claire.
The overwhelming evidence of criminal behavior.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I find the impeachment discussion really troubling because to me that should be incredibly simple. I understand there's a political calculation to it. I understand that. But he committed a crime. If you can go to jail, you ought to be impeached.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.